All right, let's dive deep into the life and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Well, as a kind of a starting point for our exploration, I think as we go along and uncover some fascinating facts and some insights, you'll find that there's more to this iconic figure than meets the eye.
Absolutely. And what's truly captivating is how his personal journey intertwined with the monumental social and political shifts of his era. And, his story holds, I think, valuable lessons for us today.
For sure. Let's start with his early life. It's interesting to note that he wasn't always Martin Luther King Jr. He was actually born Michael King Jr. after his father.
That's right. The name change happened after his father, who was a Baptist minister, traveled to Germany in 1934 and was deeply inspired by the Protestant Reformation leader, Martin Luther, and decided to change both his own name and his son's.
It makes you wonder how this seemingly simple change might have influenced his path. And speaking of influence, his family was deeply rooted in the Baptist church. Do you think that growing up immersed in that tradition played a role in his development?
Absolutely. That the background instilled in him a deep sense of faith and social justice. But it's fascinating to note that even as a young man, MLK Jr. grappled with some of the core Baptist doctrines. During his adolescence, he questioned some of the literal interpretations of some biblical stories and even expressed doubts about the resurrection of Jesus.
Wow, it's remarkable that he was engaging in such deep theological reflection at such a young age.
It really speaks to his intellectual curiosity and his willingness to challenge established ideas, even those deeply ingrained in his upbringing. And this independent thinking would become a hallmark of his leadership.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Of course, we can't talk about MLK Jr.'s early life without acknowledging the stark reality of segregation in the South. There's a poignant story about MLK Jr. and a white friend who lived across the street from him. They were close playmates until the age of 6, when they were suddenly forced to attend separate schools due to their race.
And you might be wondering about the historical context of this separation. It was mandated by Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation across all aspects of Southern life, from schools and restaurants to public transportation and even water fountains. So this system created the very foundation of oppression that MLK Jr. dedicated his life to dismantling.
It's just heartbreaking to imagine those children being separated simply because of the color of their skin.
Imagine growing up in a society where such divisions are considered normal and legally enforced. It's no wonder that this experience had a profound impact on MLK Jr., solidifying his understanding of the deeply ingrained racial divides in the South.
Absolutely. This early encounter with racism undoubtedly fueled his passion for justice. And as he grew older, he even began to challenge traditional notions of what a Black leader should look like. He was known for his sharp dress sense, earning the nickname Tweed among his friends. He embraced a certain style and presentation, which is something that we might not typically associate with someone known primarily for his activism.
And this attention to appearance helped him project an image of respectability and challenge stereotypes that were often associated with Black men at the time. It was a subtle but powerful way of subverting expectations and asserting his dignity.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great example of how even small details can play a role in shaping a movement. Now let's talk about his journey from student to activist. MLK Jr.'s first experience with a more integrated society came during a summer job in Connecticut when he was just 15 years old.
He was astonished to find that Black and white people could attend the same churches and interact freely in public spaces. He even wrote a letter home expressing amazement at the lack of segregation there.
I bet that must have been a truly eye-opening experience for him, especially after growing up in the segregated South.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It contrasted so starkly with his upbringing and exposed him to the possibility of a more just and equitable society. This experience, along with his education at Morehouse College, a historically Black institution, played a significant role in shaping his commitment to social justice.
So Morehouse provided him with a strong intellectual foundation and further nurtured his spiritual growth.
And it was during his time at Morehouse that he decided to enter the ministry, believing that the church offered the most effective platform for serving humanity and advocating for social change.
And that decision would ultimately lead him to embrace the revolutionary power of nonviolent protest.
MLK Jr.'s approach to activism wasn't wasn't simply about protest and injustice. It was a calculated strategy for social change, rooted in the principles of nonviolent resistance.
So he believed that organized nonviolent protests would force media attention and expose the brutalities of segregation to a global audience. So it was a way of using the power of the media to sway public opinion.
Exactly. He understood that images of peaceful protesters being met with violence would shock the conscience of the nation and ultimately galvanize support for the movement.
And we saw this strategy play out in several pivotal events. The Albany movement in 1961, for example, though it faced some initial setbacks, it brought attention to the struggle for voting rights in the South. It was there that activist James Bevel introduced a controversial but effective tactic involving children in the demonstrations.
And this decision sparked debate even within the movement itself, but it undeniably amplified the moral urgency of the cause.
And then in 1963, the Birmingham campaign took center stage. The images of police using fire hoses and attacked dogs against peaceful protesters, many of whom were children, were broadcast on national television and became impossible to ignore.
Yeah, these events really highlighted the effectiveness of nonviolent resistance. In provoking a response from authorities and swaying public opinion, the nation was horrified, and public opinion shifted dramatically in favor of civil rights.
Right, and of course we can't talk about MLK Jr. without mentioning his iconic I Have a Dream speech during the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom.
And you might be familiar with that iconic speech, but it's important to remember that the March on Washington had a much broader agenda that's relevant to many of the social and economic challenges that we face today.
Right, so it wasn't just about ending segregation.
Exactly. The march included specific demands for economic justice, voting rights, and protection from police brutality.
Yeah.
The organizers called for a $2 minimum wage for all workers, which would be over $20 in today's dollars.
Yeah, it's a reminder that the fight for civil rights was deeply intertwined with the fight for economic justice. And even within this unified call for equality, there were diverse perspectives and approaches.
Even during this historic march, there were internal debates and disagreements. Malcolm X, a prominent figure in the Black Power movement, criticized the march's emphasis on integration and nonviolence, calling it a farce. And the Nation of Islam, which advocated for black self-reliance and separation, even boycotted the event.
Wow, so it's interesting how even within a movement fighting for a common goal, there can be such a spectrum of opinions and strategies.
It highlights the complexity of social change and the importance of understanding those nuances. And it's also important to note that MLK Jr.'s commitment to nonviolence wasn't absolute. For instance, in St. Augustine, Florida, he collaborated with a group advocating armed self-defense alongside nonviolent protests.
Oh, that's interesting. So wasn't that kind of a departure from his core principles of nonviolence? How do you reconcile those two approaches?
Well, MLK Jr. consistently advocated for nonviolent resistance. He also recognized the complexities of the struggle for freedom, and was willing to work alongside those with different tactical approaches.
Okay, so as the movement progressed, MLK Jr. began to focus on issues beyond legal segregation, particularly economic inequality, and his efforts in Chicago, focusing on fair housing practices and addressing systemic poverty, faced even stronger resistance than the desegregation efforts in the South.
Yeah, and this shift revealed that systemic racism extended far beyond legal segregation. It was deeply embedded in housing policies, employment practices, and economic structures.
So it reminds us that the fight for equality extends beyond just legal rights. It requires addressing deep-seated economic disparities as well.
Precisely. And this understanding led MLK Jr. to launch the Poor People's Campaign in 1968. This campaign aimed to build a multiracial coalition to address poverty and economic injustice across the nation.
So it was a bold and ambitious vision, but it also faced criticism even from some within MLK Jr.'s own movement. Bayard Rustin, a longtime organizer and advocate for nonviolence, resigned from the campaign, arguing that its goals were too broad and unrealistic.
And these internal debates really highlight the challenges of coalition building and the need for strategic focus within social movements.
Yeah.
Even within a movement, there are often disagreements about the best way to achieve shared goals.
Yeah, those challenges continue to resonate in social movements today, don't they? Trying to find that balance between broad vision and strategic focus.
Absolutely. And it brings us to the tragic reality that MLK Jr.'s life was cut short before he could fully realize the goals of the Poor People's Campaign.
His assassination in Memphis in 1968, while supporting striking sanitation workers, is a stark reminder of the dangers he faced in his pursuit of justice.
And let's take a moment to listen to a powerful excerpt from his final speech, delivered the night before he was killed. His "I've been to the mountaintop" speech. This speech is filled with prophetic imagery and a haunting premonition of his own death.
It's incredible to think about how much he accomplished in his short lifetime. And what's even more remarkable is that his vision extended far beyond the immediate goals of the civil rights movement. He was a strong advocate for policies that we might consider radical even today.
Yeah, in his later years, he began to speak more openly about the need for economic justice as a fundamental human right. He even proposed a guaranteed income for all Americans, an idea that has recently gained traction in modern political discourse.
Yeah, when I first learned about MLK Jr.'s stance on a guaranteed income, it really challenged my own assumptions about economic policy. It's fascinating how his ideas are still so relevant today.
He saw this as a radical but necessary step toward achieving true economic equality. He believed that providing a basic income floor would empower individuals and families, allowing them to participate more fully in society. And this proposal linked economic security to civil rights, highlighting the interconnectedness of these issues.
Yeah, it shows that he was thinking about solutions that address the root causes of poverty and inequality, not just the symptoms. And his engagement with social issues went beyond just policy and protests. He even understood the power of popular culture in shaping perceptions and driving social change. Didn't he play a role in keeping Lieutenant Uhura, the black female character played by Nichelle Nichols on the original Star Trek series?
Indeed he did. Nichelle Nichols considered leaving the show after the first season, but a chance encounter with MLK Jr. changed her mind. He was a big fan of Star Trek, and he recognized the significance of her role as a black woman in a position of authority in a futuristic utopian society.
It must have been incredible for her to hear that from someone like MLK Jr.
He convinced her to stay on the show, arguing that her character represented a vision of racial progress and equality that could inspire millions of viewers. It was a subtle yet powerful way of promoting inclusion and challenging stereotypes through popular entertainment.
Right. That story really highlights his broad understanding of how to achieve social change. He wasn't just focused on legislation or protests. He was looking for opportunities to advance the cause of equality in every facet of society.
Yeah, and it's important to acknowledge that despite his peaceful activism and message of unity, MLK Jr. faced constant opposition and harassment from those in power. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover's leadership, saw him as a threat and subjected him to relentless surveillance and smear campaigns.
And their actions were a blatant abuse of power and a stark reminder of the resistance that often accompanies calls for social justice.
And the controversies surrounding some of the information revealed. Through those surveillance efforts, it continues to this day. It adds another layer of complexity to his already multifaceted legacy.
Well, MLK Jr.'s life and work offer valuable lessons about the importance of courage, perseverance, and unwavering commitment to justice.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'd like to leave you with a question to ponder. How does MLK Jr.'s legacy resonate with the social and political landscape that we see today? What lessons can we draw from his life and work as we continue the fight for justice and equality in our own time? Explore the sources we've discussed today, delve deeper into his writings and speeches, and keep the conversation going.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the extraordinary life and enduring impact of Martin Luther King Jr.